Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are going to be using the Anchor of Hope and the Paradise Plumerias, but Honeybee has a lot of floral stamps that would work for this technique. So I actually I'm showing you the video where I am making the watercolor background, but this was actually for a different project. So what I ended up using today was just what I had left over that didn't end up being used for that other project. So because I am doing such a large area, I wanted to use my distressing so that they would be reactive with water, but I didn't want to have to keep smushing my ink pad down on my glass mat. So I'm just taking my re-inkers, and so I don't mix them up because they're all obviously very dark when you're just using one little drop of it. I started in rainbow order. So I started with red and then worked my way through to pink. This piece of paper is Canson Monteval watercolor cardstock, and I think it is 10 by 12, I think is what it is. And so I sprayed it down with my water bottle just to make it easier to get a lot of water on there. And then I'm going in with like a 1-inch wide flat brush and just making sure everything is really wet before I'm adding any of my pigment. This is just going to help it so that it moves. And as I'm going through, you'll see I'm just going to keep adding more water. So what I was working on was actually like a rainbow watercolor is what I was looking for. So I just started in the top left corner and then kind of moved around. I tried to keep colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, next to each other on my paper. So that way I knew that they would blend nicely together. So I did my red and my orange, and then I went in with my pink, and you'll see I'm just continually using that spray bottle to add water so that my pigment is moving. This one looks green when I first put it down, but once you see the green put down, you'll see that it really is yellow. And because I didn't tape my paper down, it is kind of moving into the middle because that's where the paper is bowing. I'm not overly concerned about that because I knew that this was going to be cut apart into sections. And the part that we're actually going to end up using is the middle and bottom left-hand corner. So the bottom, middle, and then left-hand side is what we're going to use for our card backgrounds today. So, but oftentimes, like when we're doing an ink smushing technique or something like that, we have a lot of leftover color on our glass mat or, whatever your nonstick surface is that you're using. And then, you just pick a piece of watercolor paper or, distressed watercolor paper to pick that up with, and then you're just left with this background. So these are some things that we can do with those backgrounds so that they get used without kind of taking away from the really pretty watercolor look that they have. So here, all of that ink kind of pooling in the middle, I wasn't loving the way that it was getting muddy. So I just went in with a paper towel and blotted it up. I also like a lot of texture in my watercolor. Not everybody does. If you like it really smooth, then don't do this. So I'm putting in splatters of clean water to create some blooms and some textures in my colors. And then I'm also doing splatters of each individual color. Yes, I am keeping them more to the color that they're like what that's already down on the paper, but I'm also a fan of them kind of mixing all over. So it doesn't bother me to have some blue in my purple or some yellow in my pink. I think that that's pretty. But if you don't like it, then don't do it. If you do it and then decide you don't like it, you can either add more water or you can pick up your paper and kind of angle it from like side to side or up and down, and it'll move those and smooth them out. I did it unintentionally here, and you'll see that in just a few minutes. I'm also adding some perfect pearls to my background. When you add perfect pearls to a wet background, it blooms into, see here, there's where I picked it up, and see how I lost all of these spatters. It's because that pigment is moving as I'm angling it because I have so much water on the surface of the paper. I wanted to keep my my spatters, so I just redid them. This is the whole piece dry, and then I will show you what we are kind of left with after I did all my other cuttings. So one is a rainbow, and one is more of an analogous color, which just means that they're next to each other on the color wheel. So it's a pink, red, purple. And then we'll start talking about the ways that we can use that leftover paper. Just to go back very quickly, that Perfect Pearls, if you want it to stay put and just be spatters of Perfect Pearls, wait until your paper is dry to put them on. If you want it to move throughout the water, then do it when it's wet. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create kind of our own pattern paper. So here, this is the Paradise Plumerias. Again, any floral, well, really any stamp will work. Anything that you can repeat stamp in the background. But I am a floral girl. So I'm going to stamp these down. I am using Honeybee's Intense Black ink because it is safe for alcohol markers, which is something else that I'm going to be doing. So because I'm stamping on watercolor paper, I do need to give it really good pressure, and I typically need to stamp twice. Watercolor paper is more textured than regular cardstock, and so sometimes you need to be able to stamp multiple times to get a smooth stamping. So here, I'm using my Misty. It makes it super easy for me to be able to stamp multiple times. And then basically you just want to make sure that your images are kind of hanging off the edge. This is one way that you can go about it. And then, I'll stamp the left and right hand corner. You want your center to be full. So that way, as you're adding other images, it fills out so that it looks like the pattern continues on off the paper. Alternatively, if you have a focal point that you really would like to be kind of the star of the show, like here we're using the Plumerias with the seashell. This is from the Anchor of Hope set. That one I'm going to stamp in the middle. I had a dog hair on my stamp. I had to get it with my tweezers. Just, casualties of owning animals. So anyway, I'm going to stamp this one in the center, and then I'll have all that room to work around. If you start by stamping your images off like the edge, you run the risk that you're not going to have room to fill the center, and that it's not going to look like it's an intentional pattern. So once I have that seashell down, I'm going to go ahead and stamp these other Plumerias. I drew both of them. They're in the same style, so I know that they're going to work really well together, even though they're from two different sets. Alternatively, there's other ways that you could do, like you could use this paper and you could stamp a bunch of these and then die cut them out, and you'd have really pretty watercolored images that were die cut that you could use on another card. But basically, to make the pattern, you're just going to keep moving your stamps around and fill in those edges once you get your center stamped. I don't clean my stamps in between. You absolutely should, because you could have a mishap. But I knew that these were, like, yes, the pattern is going to be part of the card, but there's so many other things going to go on in this card that I wasn't overly worried about getting a little smeared ink. So this will work for any color of leftover watercolor paper that you have. And even if you wanted to do like ink blending, this would work as well. But I typically, when I have backgrounds left over, they're mostly watercolor. And so we're going to shade the images with gray markers. In this case, I'm using a C1, a C3, a C5, and a C7. And I want to add dimension without taking away from the rainbow color palette, because that looks super cool. And so I want to keep that, but I just want to add some dimension to my coloring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with my darkest color first, and I'm going to add that to where my most shadowed areas are. In this case, it's the center of our plumeria. Plumerias grow kind of like pinwheels, so I'm going to start also, as I move to the C5 and the C3, adding shading where it's turning up over itself. For the leaves, I'll add the darker shading closer to where it's tucked under the plumeria and a little bit up the center, and then I'll go over that with the C5 and extend the C5 out. We're not filling in the whole piece because we want to keep that color. We're just adding shadows to create dimension. So the first way that you can use your watercolor paper, we stamped on it, you could leave it just like that. You want to step it up a notch, you could do this and add some shading. The grays, if you're using warmer colors, like if you have a like a red, orange, yellow background, maybe the warm grays would be a better bet. If you have a pink, purple, blue background. The cooler grays would be nicer with that. And that's just because though the red, orange, yellow are warmer colors, the pink, blue, purple are cooler colors. So they would look nicer with those grays. For this one, I prefer cooler grays. So I just went with that for both of the cards. I don't think that it makes that big of a difference, but on the off chance you like warmer colors, you might want to use warm grays. Copic also has toner grays and neutral grays. I don't own them, but that would probably be more neutral, seeing as how they're named that. But anywho, so with this one, you actually add the shading to the image with the markers, and it will help give it more dimension. We're not going to do too much of anything to the background. One of the things that you could do if you wanted a really dramatic background is the in-between spaces. You could go in and color those a darker color, like a black, a dark purple, a dark blue, a dark green. And that would bring those rainbow colors forward and be really fun and dramatic. That's another way that you could use it. So for this one, I'm shading everything, the leaves as well as the flowers on all of them. For the next one, we're going to do it a little bit differently, but I just really like when you can use everything that you have, especially because like with those watercolor backgrounds, like you don't want to waste the ink, so you create the background, but then what do you do with the background? You don't want to waste the paper that you put the background on. You got to use it, and so just to make sure that we're getting all that we can out of the money that we spend, this is a good way to just use those up and create something kind of different. So I'm going to color the rest of this off camera, and we're going to move on to the other background. For this one, instead of adding the grays to the flowers, we're going to actually add it to the outside, and we're going to do this by adding a cast shadow. So again, I'm going to be starting with my darkest color. If you are not confident in where your shadows go, please feel free to start with your lightest color, and then once you're confident where they go, you can always come back in and put down your darkest color. I like to do my light source in the top right-hand corner, which means that my shadows would be down into the bottom left. I am not perfect. I am human. And so I do make mistakes. And that leaf right up above where I'm doing, that one should not have had a shadow on the underneath of it. It would have been not shadowed. It would have been in the light. But again, I'm willing to forgive myself because I am human and I make mistakes, and also because we have enough going on in this card that I don't think anybody's going to notice. So the most challenging part is getting the shadows down with the first color. Once you have the shadows down with the first color, you can then just go through each consecutive color. So from the C7 to the C5 to the C3 to the C1, and just go over it till it blends out into the background. Already you can see adding the darker shadow helps the images pop forward and creates a foreground and a background where before we just had one flat image. So this is just something else that you can do. Again, it doesn't require a bunch of markers, just the gray markers, and it lets that watercolor, do the work. So I'm going to speed up the going in with the C5 because as I told you, it's just going right over that C7 and extending it out a little bit. I will slow it back down just a little, back to like regular speed when we get to the C3. And that's because I did do something a little different. Again, totally optional. It would look great just like this if we carried it all the way through to the C1. But when we talk about adding shadows to things, we talk about how there's a shadow where 2 points meet and there is a shadow where one thing lays on top of the other. So with the C3, I am going to start adding in not as bold shadows, just lighter shadows for where the flowers are laying on top of the leaves or the flowers are laying on top of the seashell. but the directionality does not change. It's still going to be down to the bottom left, and it will be that way for all of it. So whichever way you choose to add the shadows, just make sure that it stays in the same direction. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. So pick whatever corner you want your light source to be in, and then just stick with it. Alternatively, if you're not overly worried about a light directionality and you just want to lift up your images, you could just go in with the grays and completely outline your image, and it would still raise it up. It just wouldn't look as dimensional as something that has a more purposeful direction of shadow. So this is that, like I said, that C3, and I am adding that in between kind of like the flowers and the leaves, or where, the petals would lay on top of each other. I am adding all of those in, but that isn't something that is necessary. It would still look pretty cool without that portion in it. Then again, we're going to speed up for the C1, because the C1, we're going to go over the C3 and then just blend that right out into the background, and we will be left with our dimensional background. We are going to take a look at both of the backgrounds side by side before we move on. So you have your shadows on the inside on the left, your shadows on the outside on the right. Both of them look fun and dimensional and different. Another thing that you can do here, I'm testing the greens, because green is red's complementary color, yellow green is pink's complementary color, and so I wanted to see if I wanted to do the leaves. So I just went in with a little test marker of yellow green, and I didn't like it. So I'm going to keep it analogous. So I'm just going to take in the red markers. In this case, I used the R20s family because it's that more kind of corally red, which is what I have going on in the watercolor. And I'm going to add I'm going to add shading now to the actual flowers, but I am doing it with the color of the background. So we're not going to be bringing in any other colors. We are going to be sticking with that red, pink, purple, and we'll be putting them exactly where they go. Now, the rules for the shading don't change. Any place where 2 points meet, or any place where one object lays on top of the other, that's where you would add your shadows. We're just going to stick the reds with the reds, the pinks with the pinks, and the purples with the purples. Now, there will be some points where they come together and kind of blend. And in those cases, I will, take a little bit of pink into my red or a little bit of purple into my pink to make them blend together. But this is if you want something that's a little more of a pop of color, something that's a little bit brighter, you can do this to add to it. Again, the way that it was before is perfectly fine. I just like to give you guys a lot of ideas about what you could do, so that way you have multiple techniques you want to try, or depending upon what your skill level is, maybe you're comfortable with trying to add the cast shadow, but you're not comfortable with blending color families, which is totally fine. Another trick you can use is, you shade everything with gray like we did on the other one, and then you go in with one single red and go over the top of it. Your shading will stay, it will maintain, and then it will just have a red hue, like a red tinge to it over top of it, almost like how we would use color glazing. So as we do this, because all of these flowers are very similar, I am going to speed this up. I didn't want to cut any of it out because I wanted you to be able to see how it comes together. So before we move on, I did want to mention, in case you are, in case you haven't watched any of my videos in the past, couple of months, Honeybee has been pretty regularly adding to their clearance section. And I don't tell my husband. He's going to hear this because he watches all my videos, but it'll be too late by then. Ha ha ha. I've already been into the clearance section and shopping. They have like $2 stickles, and they have alcohol inks on sale. They have all kinds of stuff and some of their beautiful products. The sentiments that we're going to use today are the Miss You Big Time, and what's the other one? Big Time. Oh, I can't remember the name of it, guys. Miss You Big Time and Big Time something. What is it? I don't know. We're going to see. It'll be linked below. But anyway, there's another one that's like praying for you big time. That one's on clearance too. It's great. Those larger sentiment sets, I cannot tell you, even though they're older, how many times I have gone back to those larger sentiment sets exactly for things like this, because when I have a background I've spent a lot of time on, I want to be able to enjoy the background, and a large sentiment is kind of like the perfect addition without competing for what I have going on in the background. So there's just tons of stuff over there because they don't just carry their own product. They carry a bunch of other people's products too. So there's, different kind of, like pastes in there. There's different papers in there, embossing powders. What was the other thing that I saw? Yupo paper. I picked some of that up. I picked up some alcohol inks, just because they're all on sale, and they're just, it's like I think a warehouse cleaning out, which is great for us. It's a huge benefit for us. So if you haven't been over there, it's like 18 pages. I would highly recommend you check it out. So, anyway, with that said, I truly mean it when I say, like, you could do this with, yes, I used my own images because I had them here on my desk. I enjoy them. I enjoy coloring them. I think that they're very pretty. I realize I may be biased because I illustrated them. But you can do this with a lot of different, styles. You don't have to do florals. Really, it's just kind of getting use out of the things that we have sitting on our desk that are maybe just in our like stash. That this is a great way to use one of those up, and it completely changes the way that the background looks, from going from just a interesting watercolor to now we have this whole kind of like art piece that is going to be the focal point of our card. So we have the reds done, we have the pinks done. Now we're going to move into the purples. So when I was doing the watercolor, I should probably tell you guys that. I used Barn Door, Spiced Marmalade, Mustard Seed, Mowed Lawn, Peacock Feathers, Salty Ocean, Seedless Preserves, and Picked Raspberry. Those are the colors that I used. And I'm going to tell you that one little drop that I put in of re-inker, I did not use all of it, painting that whole 10 by 12 piece of paper. And they're still sitting in my little palette, and I can reconstitute them with a little bit of water once they dry out. And then I just put a piece of press and seal over it. And then I can just pull it out anytime that I want to watercolor and I need really strong color. Just a neat little trick there that you can have. So I chose some darker purples because in that corner, that Seedless Preserves is pretty dark, and I still wanted you to be able to see the shading. And again, these two cards kind of go through several metamorphoses. Is it plural? Yeah, metamorphosis, right? They change a lot. There we go. And so at any point that you're happy with the way it looks, you can stop. So here is both of them. And now, of course, we're going to go one more step. What else are we going to do? Well, for the one on the rainbow, I'm going to add in a cast shadow, but I'm not going to do it with the grays because remember, I shaded with my grays. So I'm going to do a cast shadow with the colors, but each of them staying in their own place. So I'm going to do the red shadow where the red is, the yellow where the yellow is. You're going to see here, I'm going to go in with a lighter green. I did end up changing that green. I switched it from a YG03 to a YG17 because the color was just not dark enough to give me a good shadow. So now here's both of them with their shadows. You can stop here, or you can add your white gel pen. I went in and added the white gel pen the same way that I would as if I had colored these with regular markers. So I added a highlight on the folded over portion of the petal. I also added a highlight to the leaves on this one, not so much on the other one because we didn't add any shading to those. I also added a highlight to the seashells. And this is, again, just something else that you can do to kind of step it up a notch. If you don't like this much contrast, that's fine. Leave this part off. You certainly don't have to do it. It just depends on, what kind of look you're looking for. And like I said before, we're all on our own different art journeys. We're all learning different things. We all have different styles. I really wanted to incorporate a little bit more white into my background. And so in order to do that, I picked up some Copic Opaque White, and I'd mix that with just a little bit of water so that I could splatter it on the background. Splatters are not for everyone. If it's not for you, skip it and move on to the next step. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. Here are the sentiments that I am going to be using. They are quite large, which makes me very happy when I'm using these type of, like a background style that is something like this. It's Big Time Kindness. I just looked, by the way. But when you want you're putting so much work into your background and you want them to shine, a nice large sentiment really is, for me, it's the way to go. So I've treated it with my anti-static tool. I am using our Brilliant White pigment ink to stamp down my sentiments. I do stamp them twice just to make sure I have good coverage. And then I use a white detail embossing powder over top of them to make sure that I have good coverage. I usually do that twice as well. And all the while this is going on, I have my heat tool preheating to minimize the warping. And then I go ahead and heat set this until they're all melted and shiny and beautiful. And then from there, I'll use the coordinating dies to go ahead and cut these out. So that way I have a nice contrasting sentiment for my card. Because remember, we do got a lot going on. So here, you could leave these like this, and this would be great. Okay, you could leave them totally like this. But I'm not gonna. Nope, I'm going to take it up a notch. I'm going to make it a full card shaker. So Honeybee has both A2 and A7 size shaker pouches. I am going to be using the A2 today. So my watercolor panel is 4 by 5.25. I am putting that on a full A2 size piece of white cardstock, which is 4.25 by 5.5. So I have a nice little white border that goes around, and I'm going to do that for both of them. Then the pouches have this film on top, which can be a little bit tricky. But if you take a piece of low tack tape and you really rub it on there, which I was not putting it on. I was just kind of like sticking it and hoping it would peel up. I really had to rub it on there and then grab the edge of the tape. You can pull the film off. This already has adhesive on it. So I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to flip my card front right inside. I'm going to pull off the adhesive for the bottom. I'm going to fold that over, and then I'm going to burnish it with my bone folder. This is the small Honeybee bone folder, just to make sure all the points are contacting the paper and I have really good, secure, wings over the back of my card. And I'm going to do the bottom and 2 sides. I'm going to leave the top portion open to add my shaker bits. So I'm going to do this again with both cards just because I think it's super fun. But you can see there, it creates this little pocket. We'll be able to add our shaker bits in and then seal it up. The easiest way to make a full shaker card I have ever found is these little pockets. So here is the other one going into its little shaker pocket, and then I am going to put in my shaker bits. I put in white sequins, clear sequins, and kind of like iridescent sequins. I'm going to be honest with you, I probably went a little overboard with the sequins. It probably didn't need to be this full, but I did what I did. So before I seal mine, I like to kind of shake them about so that they get a nice even layer. I don't want them to be all bunched up on top of each other. And then I just smooth it out. I hold my hand there, flip it over, and then remove that last piece of adhesive backer, and then just go ahead and burnish this side, and then you're done. You got a full front shaker. It's so easy to do. Such fun. And like, who wouldn't want to receive something that I play with them as I'm making them. Here, see how those are all bunched up at the bottom? I'm going to use my Honeybee, what is that? It's a die release tool. I call it the pokey tool. But I'm just going to put that down in there so that I can move those sequins around, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll flatten them out and then secure my top edge. And then from here, you would be able to adhere these card fronts to a card base. For the sentiments, I am going to use liquid adhesive. I'm going to put the happy birthday right in the center because I just have like the general, you probably can hear me shaking it around. I'm shaking it as we're talking. I'm going to just put it in the center because we just have like those florals in the background. For the Oh Happy Day, because I have that seashell with the plumerias, I'm going to put it more in kind of like the bottom right hand corner. And then I did let them dry underneath my Misty. I am using the Honeybee Obsidian rhinestones, and I'm going to glue these right on top of the acetate sleeve. They held really well. I just used my regular liquid adhesive and, put them wherever I wanted them to be. And that way we have that, black contrast because we have all the lighter color shaker bits on the inside. And then we're going to give these guys one last little shake because they are done and they're ready to go to their recipients. So I hope this helped you with some ideas that, when you have those leftover backgrounds, what you can do with them. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.